And what if the key piece of the Madeleine McCann case were in the hands of someone who promised never to reveal what they saw? And what if the truth had been silenced from day one by someone you'd never suspect? Everyone knows the image: a blonde child with blue eyes and an open smile. Madeleine McCann disappeared in 2007 at a resort in Portugal, and since then, she has become one of the most reproduced faces in history. Headlines, documentaries, theories. The whole world turned its eyes to this case. But what if I told you that what you know is only the tip of the iceberg? The surface shows a story of loss, confusion, and the search for justice. But the submerged part, the one almost no one wants to touch, is where the real secrets lie. I'm not talking about wild theories or baseless conspiracies. I'm talking about silences, about small but powerful truths that were kept, protected, and perhaps sworn never to be told. What if the greatest mystery isn't what happened to Madeleine, but why no one had the courage to reveal what they knew? Now think with me. Losing a child is already a pain beyond words. But what if, in addition, you carried a truth that couldn't be spoken? A detail, a choice, a moment, if revealed, would change everything? It's not just the pain of disappearance. It's the pain of harboring something that eats away inside. This video isn't about proving guilt. It's about understanding why certain secrets are buried alive and what that does to those left behind. Not everyone who remains silent is guilty, but every silence has a reason. From the beginning, many looked at the McCann case with suspicion because of the way the parents acted. From the interviews, the contradictions, the details that didn't add up. But perhaps the question shouldn't be, what are they hiding? But rather, why did they feel the need to hide something? Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies." Sometimes what we believe to be true prevents us from seeing what's right in front of us. And in this case, what seems too clear may be exactly what is covering what really matters. It's not just about Madeleine, it's about the weight a truth can carry, sometimes so great that it destroys an entire family. So what do? Silence, layers of silence. And what if what was hidden wasn't as monstrous as we imagine, but even so, unforgivable in the eyes of the world? Perhaps the problem isn't in the act itself, but in what that act represents, in the shame, in the guilt, in the idea that by telling the truth, something more valuable would be lost. Dignity, hope, the family's name. Silence is not the end. It is a defense. From day one, the Madeleine case turned into a spectacle. Daily headlines, reporters outside the Algarve apartment, cameras, microphones, flashes, and at the center of it all, a broken family trying to appear intact, trying to maintain control where there was nothing left to control. But the more the media pressed, the more the narrative closed in. Adjusted versions, calculated words, lawyers instead of outbursts, press offices instead of public tears. The truth, or what was left of it, became a product to be managed. It affects everyone. Now imagine living that as the parent of a missing child. Imagine trying to breathe while the entire world decides if you're innocent or guilty based on how you hold a glass of water in an interview. And then comes Viktor Frankl's phrase, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies the power to choose." Amid the chaos, choices were made. At some point between fear and exposure, someone chose to remain silent. Not because it was the best way out, but because it was the only one left. And that is when silence becomes survival. What is said is one thing. What isn't said, the look, the trembling voice, the pause before answering, carries so much more. The McCann case may never be resolved in court, but perhaps it is screaming for resolution elsewhere, in the emotional weight of those who held the truth in their throats. In 1991, a little girl disappeared in a small town in the countryside. The police investigated for weeks with no success. 20 years later, during her mother's funeral, an uncle revealed that he knew what had happened. The girl fell down the stairs during a playful moment. Fear made the family hide everything. They lived 2 decades keeping a secret, not out of malice, but out of despair. This story has no direct relation to the McCanns, but it shows how sometimes the truth doesn't vanish. It is buried alive, covered by promises, complicit looks, and sleepless nights. Let's delve into the layers that remained hidden for over a decade, not to find Madeleine, but to understand what happens when the truth becomes unbearable. If this kind of story makes you look twice, subscribe, because what comes next has never been spoken out loud. 2007, not in Praia da Luz, Portugal. The clock showed shortly after 10 p.m. when Kate McCann entered apartment 5A and realized that Madeleine's bed was empty. From that moment on, time seemed to freeze. Within hours, journalists from various countries were in the small Portuguese village. Helicopters were flying overhead, police cars, BBC crews, reporters knocking on neighbors' doors. The story spread across the world like an uncontrollable wildfire. Missing child, British parents, European resort. It was the kind of tragedy that, unfortunately, was not rare. But this time, something was different. It wasn't just the disappearance, it was who disappeared. And even more, who was involved. Madeleine was a white child, daughter of two upper-middle-class doctors, traveling through Europe with equally well-off friends. The scenario didn't fit the type of tragedy the public was used to. That shocked people, and at the same time, it sparked the media's voracious appetite for details. Any detail. The narrative was built quickly. In less than 48 hours, there was round-the-clock coverage, experts debating live, British newspapers with all-caps headlines. The family became a public character in a worldwide drama. But the more visibility, the greater the expectation. More pressure, and a greater need to provide an answer. That's when the story began to spiral out of control. Because when the public demands clarity and doesn't receive it, they create their own versions. And if the police hesitate, if the testimonies don't add up, if the gestures seem rehearsed, well, doubt is born, and worse, it grows. From then on, it wasn't just about looking for Madeleine. It was about proving that the parents weren't hiding anything. And that changes everything. Other similar cases help us understand why the Madeleine case exploded the way it did. In 1979, Ethan Patz, a 6-year-old boy, disappeared in New York. He was the first child to have his photo printed on milk cartons. The case changed the way missing children were handled in the U.S. In 1945, 5 siblings from the Sauter family in West Virginia vanished after a house fire. They were never found. The police said one thing, the parents believed another. The case became a symbol of distrust between families and authorities. More recently, in 1991, J.C. Dugard was kidnapped at age 11 and held captive for 18 years, all in a fenced backyard, with neighbors and police never suspecting a thing. These cases share one thing in common, the feeling that the truth was right there, but no one wanted to see it. Now back to the McCanns. Their social class helped shape the case. It wasn't just a missing child. It was a family above any suspicion, suddenly suspected of everything. The media, which initially placed them on a pedestal of compassion, flipped the narrative. And here comes Michel Foucault's phrase, "Truth is a thing produced." It sounds heavy, but look at what it reveals. What the public accepts as truth depends on who tells it, when it's told, and how it's told. The British media said one thing, the Portuguese police said another, and the public chose a side. But in the midst of this war of narratives, the parents' version began to be re-edited. Details changed, words were substituted, versions were rehearsed, and the question that began to circulate quietly, in closed circles and obscure forums, turned into a collective whisper. What if they know more than they say, but they didn't speak because they simply couldn't? The accepted truth was constructed. The other, perhaps harsher, remained in the background, protected by fear, guilt, and the weight of a secret no one wants to bear alone. Soon after the Portuguese police started doubting the McCanns' version, what was a tragedy turned into a siege. The house was monitored day and night. Every gesture of the parents was scrutinized. If Kate cried too much, it was considered fake. If she didn't cry, it was coldness. If she gave an interview, she was seeking fame. If she was silent, it was guilt. The body reacts to trauma in a strange way, the mind even more so. And that's when the first signs of something off began to appear. Kate, for instance, obsessively wrote in her diary, repetitive notes, phrases about regret, time that can never be regained, and the constant fear of having let something essential slip away. Jerry, on the other hand, plunged into an almost military routine, calculated steps, a hard gaze, always in control. But that control was only an appearance. Behind closed doors, there was something else, the kind of silence not born of mourning, but of the fear of speaking something that might shatter what little remained. As if there were an invisible thread holding everything together, and any word out of place could break that thread. The police wanted answers. The world wanted justice, that no one would ask anymore. That May 3rd never existed. It was in this vacuum that defense mechanisms were born. Denial. She's alive. Dissociation. It wasn't us there. Rationalization. It was the system that failed, not us. And deep down, something even more profound. Maybe they knew something. Not everything, but something. Something small, but dangerous. A detail, a poorly made choice, a miscalculated time. Something that, if spoken out loud, would change everything. Have you ever tried to open a file on your computer and seen that message? Encrypted file, a password is required. That's how certain secrets work. You might have the document. It's right there in front of you. But if you don't have the password or the courage, then it remains inaccessible, useless, untouched. In the McCann case, the secret may never have been completely erased. It might be there, within every phrase spoken hesitantly, every pause before answering, every change in version. But no one has the password, and perhaps not even they do, because when the mind is pushed to the extreme, it finds ways to survive. Trauma psychology calls this dissociation. It's when you break the connection between what you experienced and what you can remember, or when you remember, but as if it wasn't you. Carl Jung's phrase helps explain this. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That might be exactly what happened. A story reconstructed gradually to fit into a bearable reality. A narrative made not to deceive the world, but to save those who can no longer bear the guilt. Now add to that the pressure from public opinion, the media, the police, the internet, every post, every hashtag, every interview, all demanding an answer that perhaps no one there had the courage to give. And then silence stops being just a choice. It becomes a shelter. It becomes survival. But this shelter isn't invincible. It has cracks. And when the pain can no longer be contained, it escapes. In a misworded phrase, in a look that lingers half a second too long, in a sentence that seems too rehearsed. That's when the truth begins to emerge. And it's through those cracks that we will follow. Because what comes next might be the turning point. Sometimes what hurts isn't what happened, it's what was never said. During an interview for a British channel, years after the disappearance, Kate McCann looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were swollen, but her face remained resolute. She took a deep breath, paused for a second, and said, "I wish I could go back in time. There are so many things I would have done differently. That was it." But in that sentence was a weight that couldn't be contained in words. It wasn't a confession, nor an apology. It was something else. Regret. A kind of pain that comes not from an action, but from omission. And here lies the turning point. Perhaps the issue was never whether they caused the disappearance, but rather if they failed to prevent it. And what if, on that night, something happened that could have been avoided? What if the secret isn't a crime, but a mistake? Something that, in the eyes of the world, might seem small, but that, between the lines, transforms into an emotional sentence. An unspoken warning, a door left ajar, too much time lost at dinner, a common choice with a tragic end. This is emotional guilt, the kind that doesn't take anyone to court, but it leads to insomnia, to the lingering echo of doubt, to looking in the mirror and thinking, what if? It's like a virus, invisible, yet present. It doesn't shout, it only whispers, it slowly corrodes, day after day. The truth may not be shocking, but it can be unbearable. And silence? In this scenario, silence becomes protection, not against justice, but against emotional collapse. Time passed. The media shifted focus. The McCanns' faces aged before the cameras, but something remains, the absence. Not only the absence of Madeleine, but the absence of a complete truth, the one that closes the circle. That brings peace, even if without exact answers. The one that says, this is what happened, but how do you do that when you can't even admit it to yourself? Kate and Jerry went on with their lives, but not as before. The house changed. The routine changed. The way of smiling as well. In more recent interviews, Kate avoids details, but every now and then, something slips out. A gesture, a word with a double meaning, a maybe uttered unintentionally. It's these small cracks that reveal that the secret, if it exists, is not a movie plot. It's an emotional wound that never healed. And here comes Aristotle's phrase, doubt is the beginning of wisdom. We're not here to nail down truths, but to remember that doubt, when well used, helps us see where no one else wants to look. The silence that the family carries may have become a wall, one that prevents not only the truth from emerging, but also the mourning from beginning. Because mourning only starts when the truth is accepted, and the world never had that chance. This case isn't just about justice. It's about what happens when words choke, when a family locks itself in a dark room and throws away the key, when doubt becomes a defense, and time passes, but the weight does not. Perhaps we'll never know everything, but what What we heard and what remained in silence, it already speaks volumes. More than enough to understand that sometimes the greatest secret isn't in what was done, but in what no one had the courage to say. In the end, it isn't about theories. It isn't about choosing sides. It's about facing a question that no one likes to ask. What if the truth never came out because someone decided to bury it along with their own piece? If you stop to think, everything we know about this case was filtered. Through cameras, through official reports, through edited versions. The part that was left out, the part that scares, that weighs, that no one had the courage to say, remains there, untouched, silent, like the base of an iceberg. We only see what's above the surface. What sinks the entire structure remains invisible. And there's one thing I truly believe. The complete truth only appears when someone decides to go all the way down. No beating around the bush, no masks, and most importantly, no fear of what might be found. Confucius said, "Wherever you go, go with all your heart." But what if on that path the heart is full of guilt or full of secrets? That's when the road gets dark. Silence is comfortable, but it is never neutral. It shapes stories, and sometimes it destroys people from the inside. Now, if this type of story captivates you, if you're the kind who feels that there's always a missing piece in the puzzle, then the next video is going to shake you. There, we'll talk about another case where what no one said might have changed everything. If you like that chill down your spine, that mix of curiosity and indignation, you know this isn't the end. Oh, and in the first comment, there's a book that has everything to do with what we discussed today. It delves deep into what silence hides and what it unintentionally reveals. I won't say which one it is. I'll just say that if you made it this far, you're going to want to see it. And tell me something. If you watched until the end, comment below. I am the one who listens to what no one says. That way I'll know you went all the way with me and that we're in this search together. Let's move on, because there's more. And you know, what no one wants to tell is exactly what needs to be said.